My parents sold my inheritance to fund my sister's luxury weddings, so I walked away quietly, then returned to reclaim everything they thought they owned. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and growing up, my parents always treated me like I was just there to clean up after everyone else. I was the quiet, responsible one, the kid who finished homework before anyone else, saved every dollar I could, and never complained when chores piled up or my sister, Lily, got her way. Meanwhile, Lily was the golden child in every sense. She had lavish birthday parties with clowns, gift bags full of designer toys, and trips abroad that I only ever saw through photo albums and social media posts. Every time she came back from another family adventure, my parents would gush over how talented, charming, and special she was. Barely glancing at the work I'd put in to make our home run smoothly, or my small achievements at school, I learned early that love from them wasn't earned through effort. It was granted arbitrarily, usually with a loud cheer or a fanfare of attention. I remember staring at my inheritance account when I was 16, the numbers slowly growing each year. It wasn't just money, it was my lifeline, the safety net my parents promised I'd have when I stepped into adulthood. I'd picture myself finally moving out, maybe buying a small place or investing in my future without leaning on anyone. But even then, subtle cracks in the foundation were apparent. I overheard my parents discussing Lily's dream wedding budget when she was just 18. Their laughter and casual dismissal, "Oh, don't worry about your brother's share. He'll be fine," stung more than I could admit. Friends often remarked I was too responsible for my own good, a phrase that cut because it was true. I was careful, calculating, and cautious, while Lily got to be reckless and adored. At family gatherings, I would smile and nod while my sister batted her eyelashes at relatives, soaking up praise I had to earn silently every single time. It was unfair, and I hated that I felt resentful for something I couldn't control. Sitting in my room at night, staring at my growing inheritance, I promised myself that one day I'd be more than the invisible safety net. I didn't yet know how or when, but deep down, I sensed that the life I was meant to have, the one I'd worked and saved for, might never be mine if I didn't act. And yet, every time I tried to voice concern, it was brushed off. I thought I could trust my inheritance to finally give me some freedom, a way to step out from under my parents' constant oversight. I spent years imagining what I could do with it, maybe finally rent my own apartment, or invest in a small business, or even just have a safety net that wasn't tied to Lily's whims. Every extra shift at work, every skipped night out with friends, every hour I stayed late studying or helping neighbors for cash, all of it felt like I was building toward that future. My parents never once seemed to notice. One evening, when I was 20, I overheard Mom talking on the phone while I was doing dishes. "We'll cover everything for Lily's wedding," she said, her voice light and giddy. "Don't worry about your brother's inheritance. He won't mind." I froze, my hands tightening around the sponge, the suds slipping through my fingers. My dad chuckled in the background. "He's responsible. He's always responsible. He'll understand family comes first." The casualness of it nearly broke me. That money was supposed to be my reward for years of diligence, my lifeline into adulthood, and they were planning to spend it without asking me. I tried to reason with myself, whispering in my own head that maybe they wouldn't actually touch it. Maybe this was just wedding talk, a bit of overexcitement that would never materialize. But a pit of unease settled in my stomach that night and refused to leave. I remember lying in bed, the hum of the streetlights through my window, thinking about how unfair everything was. Lily's laugh floated up from the living room, warm and carefree. While I felt a knot of frustration tightening in my chest, even friends noticed the change in me. "You can't let them walk all over you forever," my best friend Jake said over a late-night coffee. "You're not invisible, man. You deserve what's yours." I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside I was already calculating, replaying overheard conversations and envisioning what I might do if they actually took my inheritance by the time I was 22. The tension had built into a quiet anger, simmering beneath every interaction, every family dinner, every casual comment about helping Lily, every offhand remark about being responsible enough to understand. It all felt like fuel to a fire I hadn't yet learned to control. I was beginning to realize that my parents had never seen me as an equal, not really, and that realization stung harder than any betrayal I had ever imagined. Then, one day, What I feared most became impossible to ignore. I stumbled upon paperwork that would change everything. The day Lily announced her engagement, something inside me shifted. I had expected it eventually. She'd always been the center of attention. But hearing her voice over the phone, bubbly and radiant, made the pit in my stomach tighten. "Mom, Dad, we're getting married next spring. Everything has to be perfect." I could practically hear the confetti and champagne popping in their heads. That weekend, at the family dinner, the planning began in earnest. My parents spoke over each other, debating venues, caterers, and a dress that apparently cost more than my first 2 paychecks combined. "We'll need to cover the floral arrangements," my mom said, barely looking at me as she scribbled numbers on a pad. "Oh, and don't worry about your brother's share," she added with a dismissive wave. I choked on my water, my throat dry, my hands curling into fists under the table. "Mom, Dad, what do you mean by that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, it's fine," my dad replied casually, leaning back in his chair. "You've got your life figured out. Lily deserves this. You'll understand when you're older." His tone was so light, so patronizing, that it felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to make them see how unfair it was. Forcing a polite smile while the conversation continued around me, I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples as they rattled off numbers for the wedding budget, completely unconcerned with how that fine casually tossed over my future felt like a betrayal. After dinner, I retreated to my room, the muffled sound of Lily's laughter from the living room cutting through the walls. I stared at the ceiling, imagining the life I had planned, the freedom I had earned for myself, slowly slipping away without anyone asking me. My inheritance, the one thing that was supposed to be mine, suddenly felt like it was evaporating. I began to notice the subtle hints everywhere, the whispered discussions in the kitchen, the excited glances, the way they both assumed I wouldn't notice. The more I listened, the more it sank in. My parents didn't see me as someone who deserved a voice, not in this wedding, not in anything. And then, as if the universe wanted to test me further, I overheard my dad mention a number, the exact amount from my inheritance they were planning to use. My chest tightened. I realized I was standing on the edge of something I hadn't yet fully understood, a betrayal that could cost me everything. It hit me like a punch in the gut the day I finally saw the paperwork. I was cleaning out some old files in the study when I stumbled upon the legal documents my inheritance, signed over, without my consent, funneled directly into Lily's wedding fund. My hands trembled as I held them, the paper crisp but heavy, almost as if the weight of their betrayal had been etched into it. I felt dizzy, my stomach twisting, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I confronted my parents immediately. "What is this? Why is my inheritance gone?" I demanded, my voice shaking more from disbelief than anger. "Oh, come on," Mom said, brushing it off as if it were nothing. "It's for family, for Lily. She's our daughter, too, you know. It was my inheritance." I shouted, stepping closer, trying to make them see the injustice. "You promised this to me for years. You sold it without even asking me." Dad leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, looking annoyed rather than guilty. "You're overreacting. You've always been responsible. You don't need it. Lily deserves this more than you ever did. She's getting married, and this is what families do for each other." I felt the world tilt. Everything I had believed about fairness, about my parents' loyalty, crumbled in that moment. The childhood I had spent trying to be the responsible one suddenly seemed meaningless. I thought about every late-night study session, every weekend spent working odd jobs, every ounce of energy I poured into being the perfect son, and it was all for nothing. I retreated to my room, slamming the door behind me. I sat on my bed, the legal documents spread across my lap, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to cry. I cried for the trust that had been shattered, for the years of effort that were erased with a signature, and for the family that had made it clear I didn't matter as much as Lily. But somewhere in that despair, a spark of resolve ignited. I couldn't change what they had done, not yet, but I could plan. I could wait. I could find a way to reclaim what was mine, and as I stared at the numbers on those papers, the seed of quiet, deliberate revenge took root. I didn't respond to anyone after that. Not Mom, not Dad, not Lily. Quietly, without a word. I moved into a small apartment across town, took on extra shifts at work, and buried myself in routine, pretending to everyone, including myself, that I was okay. But inside, the anger and betrayal simmered like a fire refusing to die. I couldn't stop thinking about the inheritance, about the years I had sacrificed for nothing, and about how my parents had treated me as if I were invisible. The first few weeks were the hardest. I would sit alone in my apartment at night, the hum of the radiator filling the silence, and imagine confronting them not with shouting or tears, but with cold, calculated justice. I replayed the moment I saw the paperwork over and over, memorizing every dismissive glance, every casual word, every laugh that had cut deeper than a knife. I hated them for underestimating me, for thinking I would silently accept being robbed of my future, yet I knew I couldn't act impulsively. Patience became my weapon. I started gathering every document I could find, bank statements, contracts, even small receipts that could prove mismanagement. Slowly, methodically, I built a quiet fortress of evidence. Every extra hour I worked, every penny I saved, wasn't just for survival, it was for leverage. For the day I would reclaim what was mine. Friends noticed my withdrawal and tried to reach me. "Man, you need to talk to someone," Jake said one evening when I grabbed a coffee between shifts. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just busy." Inside, I laughed bitterly. Busy? No. I was plotting, biding my time, letting them think I was broken while I quietly prepared my return. Even Lily called a few times, her voice light and oblivious. "Hey, are you coming to the wedding planning stuff? Mom says you should be involved." I hung up without a word, my chest tightening. She had no idea that the life she was enjoying at my expense would soon be shattered not with rage, but with precision. And as I lay in my tiny apartment that night, the city lights casting long shadows across my walls, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I wasn't powerless. I had been underestimated. Yes, dismissed. Yes, but underestimated meant unprepared. And now I was ready. The question was, how long would I let them feel secure before I made my move? Life without them was strange at first, almost hollow. I had my apartment, my work, my routine, but it felt like living in a world where I was constantly reminded of what I had lost. Every morning, I walked past stores selling wedding dresses, fancy invitations, and gifts that Lily would receive, and my chest tightened. I forced myself not to think about the injustice, to focus on work, bills, and slowly rebuilding my sense of self. But deep down, I was counting the days, stacking patience like bricks, knowing I would need every ounce of it when the time came. I began investing in myself, both mentally and financially. I took courses online, expanded my skills, and even started a small side business that grew quietly but steadily. With each milestone, I felt my confidence return. I realized that for the first time in years, I was making progress entirely for myself, not to please anyone else. The sense of independence was intoxicating, but I never forgot why I had fled. My parents and Lily had made it clear where their priorities lay, and I refused to let them dictate my life again. Meanwhile, news of Lily's wedding plans continued to trickle in. Invitations were designed, deposits made, and social media announcements began. Friends would casually mention the latest details, and I would nod politely, all the while feeling a mix of anger and grim satisfaction. She was living lavishly on money that had been promised to me, completely unaware that I was quietly biding my time. There were moments when I caught glimpses of cracks in the armor. Lily would call asking for advice or money for extras, and Mom and Dad looked flustered when they realized I wasn't available to placate them. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it gave me hope. I could see their overconfidence and entitlement starting to wobble, even if they didn't know it yet. At night, I would sit by my window, the city lights flickering like a distant audience, and imagine the day I would walk back into their lives not angry, not desperate, but fully in control. Every document I had collected, every financial record I had studied, and every strategic move I planned would be a quiet but devastating revelation. I was building more than wealth. I was building power. And power, unlike trust or love, could never be stolen. But even as I planned, I couldn't shake the feeling that the biggest challenge wasn't the legal battle ahead. It was keeping myself from breaking before the right moment came. I never expected a phone call to change everything. It was late one night, the apartment quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater. When I got a call from a bank manager I barely knew. "Sir, I believe there's been a misallocation of funds regarding your inheritance," he said, his voice careful but urgent. I froze, heart hammering. I had spent years assuming my parents had spent everything, that my money was gone forever. It turned out they had made a huge mistake. While they had taken a large portion for Lily's wedding, some of my inheritance had been left in accounts they assumed I wouldn't notice. They had mismanaged it, funneled some into risky investments without my knowledge, thinking I would never check. That revelation hit me like a wave. Not only was my inheritance partially intact, but the errors meant I could reclaim more than I had originally thought. I remember pacing the small confines of my apartment, the floor cold beneath my bare feet, the documents spread across the kitchen table like a battlefield map. I felt a thrill I hadn't allowed myself in years, a mix of vindication, excitement, and quiet fury. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about proving that I couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or underestimated. I could almost hear my parents' voices in my head. "He'll understand. He's responsible." Well, they had severely miscalculated. Every late night I had spent, every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had been invisible had led to this exact point. I was no longer the powerless son. I was an emerging force, quiet and calculated, ready to reclaim what was mine, even as I began drafting letters, compiling evidence, and contacting lawyers. I realized that this newfound leverage wasn't just practical, it was emotional. The thought of them thinking they had succeeded, only for me to quietly take back everything, sent a thrill through me I couldn't deny. I smiled, a small, dangerous smile, realizing for the first time in years that I had the upper hand. But in the back of my mind, a dark thought lingered. If they had mismanaged my inheritance this badly, what else had they done behind my back? I was about to find out, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the next shocking revelation. From that moment, I became obsessed in a frantic, desperate way, but in a meticulous, calculated one. Every free hour outside of work was spent poring over documents, tracing transactions, and cross-referencing every account and record my parents had access to. My apartment became a war room of sorts, sticky notes on the walls, spreadsheets open on my laptop, bills and contracts stacked in piles around me. Even the hum of the city outside seemed to fade when I focused, replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat. Steady and determined, I started consulting with a lawyer I had met briefly years ago. "Everything has to be airtight," he said, pushing a folder across the table. "If they dispute this, even a small error could derail you. You need proof, dates, signatures, everything." I nodded, feeling a thrill I hadn't felt since I discovered the mismanaged funds. For the first time, every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of invisibility seemed to converge toward a single purpose, reclaiming my life, piece by piece. Meanwhile, Lily remained oblivious. Social media posts and family updates showed her indulging in luxurious wedding planning, seemingly untouchable. Every new dress she posted, every floral arrangement preview, every expensive tasting she shared fueled the fire inside me. I didn't feel rage so much as clarity. I could see how arrogant and complacent they had all become, and I knew they had no idea what was coming. Even my friends noticed a change in me. Jake called one night, "Dude, you're intense. Just don't burn out before you get what you want." I laughed, but he didn't know the half of it. This wasn't just about the inheritance more it was about validation, respect, and finally showing them that I couldn't be dismissed. As weeks turned into months, my plan became more concrete. I would walk back into their lives not as the obedient, invisible son, but as someone fully armed with facts, leverage, and the patience to strike at the perfect moment. Every legal step, every financial check, every carefully archived document was a move on a chessboard they didn't even know existed. And yet, even as I felt the thrill of control building, I couldn't shake the fear that something unexpected might happen. One wrong move could ruin everything, and the more I planned, the more I realized the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. The day I finally walked back into their lives, I felt a strange mixture of calm and adrenaline. I didn't storm in shouting or demanding answers. No, I came quietly, armed with evidence, dates, and documentation that left no room for denial. My parents didn't recognize me at first, not because I had changed physically, but because the invisible, Compliant son they had counted on for years had been replaced by someone deliberate, precise, and unshakably focused. I laid everything on the table in the living room. Contracts, bank statements, copies of transactions, and correspondence filled the space between us. "This is everything," I said, my voice steady, almost chillingly calm. "Everything that was taken from me, everything you assumed I wouldn't notice. I want it back." Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You can't. This was for Lily." I didn't flinch. It was mine, and now you're going to acknowledge it. Dad tried to interrupt, his tone sharp. "We did what any parents would do." "No," I said, cutting him off. "You did what was easiest for you. You gambled with my future because you thought I'd accept it quietly. That ends now." I watched as their faces shifted from shock to disbelief, to the dawning understanding that I wasn't the kid they had dismissed. Every carefully calculated step I had taken, every record I had collected, proved that I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't angry in a blind emotional why, was composed, unstoppable. And prepared, Lily stood behind them, confused and pale. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" "Completely," I said, looking directly at her. "Everything you thought you had spent, mismanaged, or ignored. It's mine, and you're going to return it, or we'll go through legal channels." I'm done being silent. The tension in the room was almost suffocating. My parents exchanged glances, finally realizing their miscalculation. I could feel the shift their power over me, the control they had assumed, dissolving. For the first time in my life, I wasn't pleading for recognition. I was commanding it, and yet even as I felt the first thrill of victory, I knew this confrontation was only the beginning. There were still battles to fight, still accounts to reclaim, still validation to be earned. Because no matter how shocked they were now, the real payoff, the quiet, complete reclamation of my life, was yet to come. The process of reclaiming what was mine wasn't quick, but it was precise. Every bank account, every misallocated fund, every hidden transaction I had discovered over months of research became a tool in my hands. I worked with lawyers to ensure everything was legally airtight, knowing that any misstep could give them an excuse to resist. Every meeting, every phone call, every email was a step toward the quiet justice I had envisioned for years. I remember sitting in my apartment one evening, the city lights flickering through the blinds, and thinking about how far I had come. From the invisible, responsible son to someone who commanded attention through preparation, intelligence, and patience was intoxicating. I could almost hear the stunned silence that would greet my parents when I finally walked into the bank to reclaim control. The first transfer back into my accounts was the sweetest. Watching the numbers move, knowing they had assumed I would never notice, never act, it felt like validation for every sacrifice I had made. I didn't celebrate outwardly. There were no grand gestures, no triumphal declarations. My satisfaction was quiet, personal, and infinitely more powerful than any dramatic outburst could have been. Lily tried to protest when she realized how much had been taken from her wedding fund. "But I need that for the flowers, the venue," she cried, panic in her voice. I looked at her calmly. "It's not yours. It never was. And the life you planned on built from my work. You'll have to find another way." I'm done being sidelined. Mom and Dad sat stunned, guilt and anger flickering across their faces, knowing they had misjudged me completely. The power dynamic had shifted, quietly but irrevocably. They had thought I would remain silent. But patience had been my weapon. Sitting back later that night, I felt a deep, almost meditative satisfaction. The inheritance was fully reclaimed, my boundaries had been enforced, and for the first time, I felt truly in control of my life. Years of betrayal had not defeated me, they had sharpened me, prepared me to rise above, and quietly dismantled the illusion of control my family thought they had, yet. Even in that moment of triumph, I realized something important. Reclaiming money was one thing, but reclaiming my sense of self, my dignity, and my respect that had been the real victory. Even after reclaiming my inheritance, I couldn't shake the hollow ache inside me. The money was back in my accounts, my legal victories were documented, and the power dynamic had shifted, but the emotional scars ran deeper than I'd realized. I spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying years of neglect, favoritism, and betrayal. Every moment I had spent trying to earn my parents' approval, Every sacrifice I had made for a family that treated me as invisible came rushing back. I had gained wealth and control. Yes, but I had also gained the stark realization of how little they had truly valued me as a person. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if it had all been worth it. I'd worked in silence, strategized, and waited patiently. And yet the anger, the disappointment, and the grief lingered. I remembered my father's casual dismissals, my mother's indulgence of Lily, and the years I spent thinking that if I just tried harder, none of it had been enough. None of it mattered to them. And that thought hit harder than any financial loss ever could. I had moments of doubt, sitting alone in my apartment, the city lights throwing long shadows across my walls. Did I want revenge, or just recognition? Could I forgive, or would I always carry this weight? The solitude was heavy, almost suffocating. And for the first time, I realized that reclaiming my inheritance hadn't healed MIT, had just given me the tools to start. I was standing at the edge of a long emotional journey, knowing that I needed to rebuild my sense of self completely, independent of them. Even Lily noticed the shift. She tried to reach out with frantic apologies and excuses, but I didn't respond. Every attempt to draw me back into their world reminded me why I had walked away in the first place. The real challenge wasn't winning back money, it was winning back my life, my peace, and my dignity. And in the quiet of my apartment, as the hum of the city carried on outside, I finally understood. The hardest part wasn't the confrontation, the legal battles, or even the betrayal itself. The hardest part was facing the truth that family sometimes fails. In ways you can't control, and learning to forgive yourself for leaving them behind by the time I finally allowed myself to step back and breathe. Months had passed since I reclaimed my inheritance. The apartment felt different now, just a place to live, but a symbol of my independence, my power, and my resilience. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I had been invisible for years, dismissed and underestimated, and yet here I was, standing firmly in control of my life. The money was back, yes, but more importantly, my dignity, my respect, and my sense of self were restored in ways my parents could never take away. I ran into Lily a few weeks later at a family gathering, and I could see the shock on her face. Her luxurious confidence faltered when she realized the quiet power I had amassed. I didn't think you'd fight back," she stammered. I smiled softly, a calm, knowing smile. "You assumed wrong," I said. "I've always known my worth." Mom and Dad were harder to embarrassment, guilt, and lingering arrogance all playing across their faces. They had learned the hard way that underestimating me had consequences. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The satisfaction was internal, quiet, and infinitely more powerful than shouting or confrontation could ever have been. I had proven to myself that patience, strategy, and self-respect were stronger than anger or impulsive revenge. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life fully. I invested in my dreams, traveled to places I had only imagined, and surrounded myself with friends who genuinely valued me. The inheritance had been a tool, yes, but the real victory was reclaiming my autonomy, my peace, and my freedom from toxic family dynamics. I finally understood that walking away had been just as important as returning as I looked back. I felt a quiet sense of triumph. Years of betrayal, neglect, and favoritism had shaped me, but they had not defined me. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and even robbed, yet I emerged stronger, wiser, and in complete control. I didn't need to fight for recognition anymore. I had earned it silently, deliberately, and irrevocably. And in that quiet, steady moment, I finally felt free, truly free.